But I think it's incredibly important that that regulation gets refined by a bit of competition, and I think that's a healthy thing. I was always asked, if you were ever Prime Minister, what law would you pass? I think the law you pass is to abolish a law every time you make a law. And I think if you can chip away at bureaucracy by competition between states, that's a very good thing for India.
Tom, are you getting that same sense of a competition between states in India, which may at the end of the day end up being the India story for the next 5 to 10 years?
I don't know Indian politics well enough to drill down that deeply. I'll give you an analogy from America and our federal system, which allows for enormous experimentation. Has always been an asset. But at the end of the day, you need a federal government that's doing its job. And, George W. Bush, coined the phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And sometimes I worry about that with India, which is, well, this is how we are, and this is how things are, and, what can you do? And I think it has to be careful not to fall into that. That the road from New Delhi to the Taj Mahal, your iconic, heritage site, should not be the mess that it is. That to me is someone settling for too low a common denominator.
Yeah. Okay, so Vikesh, both have been said. Too much self-flagellation and also sometimes a willingness with that chalta hai attitude or jugaad. I don't know how to translate jugaad into English. It's like, somehow managing. Yeah.
Resourcefulness.
Yeah, resourcefulness.
Yes.
In a sense, I guess, yes. So which do you see more of?
You definitely see a lot of resourcefulness in India, for sure.
You mean that in a positive or a negative manner? I'm trying to figure out.
I actually mean that in a positive manner. I try and explain myself when I left India and I went to the US. We're used to solving problems with a lot of constraints, and that requires a lot of resourcefulness. And what's fascinating is, if you talk to people in Silicon Valley, they will tell you that you get the best amount of innovation when there's a lot of constraint. If you have unlimited access to resources, you're unlikely to solve the problem quickly and prioritize the right answer, because you have unlimited resources, you're going to spend a lot of time. So constraints are actually a good thing. But I'm not sure what your question was vis-a-vis jugaad.
But perhaps if the system was working a bit better, you wouldn't need so much jugaad. Does that occur to you?
Well, I think you have a different connotation of jugaad than I do. I think resourcefulness in the system is good. I think, could we do with more progress? Yes, we could. Could we, do people believe we are self-flagellating in India? I think I'm sort of going to agree with Tom a little bit that there's a little bit of sort of people adjust to the current state by saying, this is it, this is okay, we're used to this. And I think that's a temporary stage. I think with the conversation we've been having about hyperconnectivity and people being able to express their opinions a lot quicker and a lot faster, you are going to see this call to action start coming in from the grassroots, which you are seeing, I guess.
Okay, call to action coming from the grassroots. Now, frankly, we have been seeing that to some extent or the other. We've been seeing this approach. Many people say that India suddenly seems to be becoming a slightly more chaotic place. There's been these middle-class movements on the streets. You've had actually the Chief Minister of Delhi literally on the streets, sleeping on the side of his car in just the last few days. So is that the call to action that he's talking about? Is there a bit more chaos that's coming in?
I hope not. I hope he's not advocating the chaos that we are seeing in Delhi today. That's not a call to action. Somebody sent me an SMS. They said, Vishnu told Arjun, go do your dharma. But he told Kejriwal, go do your dharna. That's not governance. That's abdicating governance. If you don't know how to govern, quit. You can't mask your...
But government is supported by your party.
Well, as I said before I left India, opinion in the party was divided. The local unit took that decision, right or wrong. The point is, whoever is in government must govern. You can't mask your inability to govern by street agitations. The line that divides agitation and anarchy is a very thin line. And they may have crossed that line in the last few days.
So as we head for the 2014 election, in a sense, you have got the Congress facing the challenges, and the Congress has almost been off the headlines, if you like, for a period of time anyway, because at one hand, you have a person who's a challenger, Narendra Modi, and people are saying he's coming and he's leading the BJP forward. And then you have the Aam Aadmi Party grabbing headlines for other reasons.
You guys write the headlines, we don't.
I knew that you'd come down to the media at some point.
No, you talked about headlines. I don't write the headlines. I don't tell you what should your lead story be in your 8 o'clock broadcast. I don't tell the editor of the newspaper what the front page story should be. I think the media tends to write off parties. Media tends to prematurely celebrate parties, but that's the right of the media. I think it's too early to call what the next elections will be. There's still 2.5 months. Much can change. I admit that the Congress party appears to be the underdog today, but I think it's good to go into an election as an underdog rather than in a triumphal mood.
Okay, but I am conscious that there's no opposition party out here, so I don't want to make this about domestic Indian politics, especially in a forum like Davos. But I just wanted to ask what are the stakes in this election? And we have seen some competing visions really coming up, Sunil, in these elections. It's a change. Whatever you may say about Mr. Kejriwal and the Aam Aadmi Party, it's a change from politics like we've ever seen in India. Narendra Modi, what he says, what he represents, what he's putting out at his vision is also a change. And in a sense, he's making it a referendum on leadership. Is this going to be a really critical election?
One thing I can say, I'm a keen political observer. I watch things. I think we have changed the leaf here. We have turned the page decisively in India. There's no question about that. For me, Aam Aadmi is nothing but an expression of people's disillusionment with the current political system. So it's an expression. I leave the other part of government, because I don't want to comment on that. The fact is, politics has become suddenly much more accountable. People who wish to be in government, in leadership roles, need to now know that they are going to be held accountable. So I would say some of the politicians need to be worried, because society, people are going to seek accountability. Now, what happens in the next election is, as Mr. Chidambaram said, is hard to predict. It's one of the most difficult elections to predict, I would say. It is going to be one of the most interesting elections from an observer point of view after 1977, I would say. Jury's out. 2.5 months is a long time in politics. Let's see where it goes.
Okay. Are you at all, Jeremy, keeping the elections in mind when you're making your investment decisions in India, or no?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's a big topic for international investors. For India to fulfill its potential, you need two things. You need domestic confidence. So everyone watching this needs to feel more confident about the future, but international investors, because you're going to need the capital to grow as fast as you should grow. And I think we do watch very carefully. What international investors need is to understand what the rules of the road are, understand how the legal system works, understand how facilitation will work when they launch a long-term project, and to make sure that things happen a little bit faster. So I was very positive about the things in India, but I think everyone recognizes if things can happen a little faster and the rules of the road are clearer, that will help.
Okay. Nikesh?
I guess we have a tendency to overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. I think, yes, the elections are important, but I still believe in the long term India will fulfill its potential of growth. So these are all temporary things that are going to happen in the way, which I'm sure the domestic market will resolve. So we are long-term bullish on the market. We continue to invest because we believe at the end, as I said in the beginning, you have a young population, very technologically savvy. They're going to go out and innovate. They're going to go out and adapt and adopt technology. And you're going to see the SMEs all get engaged. So it's a good market.
So for a Google, it doesn't really matter who's forming the government to that extent. Unless it's somebody who comes and says we're going to ban the internet, in which case you have issues. In which case there are lots of issues.
It's a variable we cannot control. So we're going to observe and we're going to keep investing in the market. And I suspect there's a lot of people in the country who will make sure they will keep the government accountable. And if they keep them accountable for the interest of the user, we'll be fine.
Okay. Tom, I know you haven't been to India to get a sense of what's happening in the elections. I'm not going to ask you to predict how many seats the Congress Party or the BJP.
I wouldn't hazard to get into. There are two reasons that I'm optimistic about India in the long term. The first is I think we're heading for a world, as the world gets hyper-connected, where literally in our lifetimes, everyone in the world will be online. We'll have a network connection. So this thing called the digital divide, I think, is going to be in our rear view mirror. Now, when that happens, the futurist Marina Gorbis taught me this. The biggest divide in the world, once everyone's on the network, is going to be the motivational divide. And I think India's culture of education, prizing education, is going to be a real asset for that. But it's got to fulfill that aspiration by delivering the infrastructure for education for its people. The online MOOCs, I think, are going to give an enormous opportunity there. The other thing, I go back to The World is Flat. So I wrote The World is Flat in 2004 at a time when the world had just gotten enough connectivity where we could draw on 150,000 Indian engineers to solve our problem. And our problem was Y2K. So we were worried as the millennium changed that our computers and our electronic systems and our water systems were going to shut down, and there was just enough connectivity at the turn of the century that we could suddenly leverage all this Indian talent. Now, whenever I go to India, and every time I go, I do the same thing. I call NASSCOM, the Indian High Tech Association. I say, get me together with your 7, 8 best young entrepreneurs. And I do this every year I go. And here's what I've really found exciting and fascinating, is that what I now see is young Indian entrepreneurs leveraging all this technology not to solve our problems, but to solve their problems and on their cost platforms. And as they solve more and more of their problems, of course, they're the world's problems and they're our problems too. We can have 1 billion more people, not just in India, working on the world's biggest problems. And if you want to be optimistic about the world, to me, that's the biggest reason.
So the elections, let me just drag you back to that. What are the elections going to mean to you, other than being the greatest pageant of democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, well, the first thing is, when 1/7 of the world holds an election, you should pay attention. Who wins that election really does matter. But I just really hope that it is able to produce a government, and again, I'm saying this from an American point of view. We live in an age, the downside of all this technology that we've talked about, the upside is the transparency. It's fantastic. You can say when that teacher didn't show up at school. You can trace whether the money came from the federal government to the village where it was supposed to go. But at the same time, to govern in this world, to be any kind of public figure, it is incredibly noisy, and it's going to get noisier. And you almost have an instant poll whether you're writing a column in the New York Times or you have to be the finance minister of India. And to govern under those conditions is going to really test democracy, I believe.
Right. Mr. Chairman, let me just test a hypothesis on you. Whether it's a company or whether it's a country, one of the first things that you look for is leadership. Now, there is a perception, which we can debate whether it's a correct or a bad or a wrong perception, that India has been lacking leadership a little bit. So, in a sense, what Mr. Modi represents is leadership, and he's trying to make this a referendum on leadership. Even what's been happening with the Aam Aadmi Party or other movements coming in, anytime you have a vacuum of leadership, then a whole lot of other things happen to come in and fill that up, whether it's the judiciary playing a role, mass movements playing a role, the media playing a role, social media playing a role. That's what happens when you have a vacuum of leadership.